All right, guys. So this story right here. Oh man, the Democrats, man, they always try to just use racism when they can't get their way, when they don't have a strong argument for anything. They always want to pull the race card. But this probably is the most hypocritical race card pull that I've ever seen in my life. Okay? Because Elizabeth Warren just called the filibuster racist, even though she used it last year against Tim Scott's police reform bill. Okay, Democrats always love to forget that. They love to forget that they filibuster and stopped the GOP's police reform bill. Okay, the GOP actually does want police reform. They want to help solve this problem that's so racist according to the liberals or the leftists. But see, when the GOP proposes a solution, it's not enough because it comes from the GOP. And it's not even enough when it comes from a black man. Okay, this is how politics works. So let's rewind here on the filibuster, guys. I've talked about the filibuster a little bit. When it first came up in regards to the Democrats trying to basically get rid of it, right? A lot of progressives are upset. They're upset because they're not getting their way, and like children, they want to boo-hoo, cry, and complain because they're not getting what they want, and then they want to take their ball and they want to go home. We don't like it. You guys can't pass minimum wage. Oh, we don't like it. You guys are blocking the Equality Act. You're blocking the Voting Rights Act. You're blocking everything. We want to take our ball and go home. We don't want to play with you Republicans anymore. That's basically it. Now, Joe Manchin and other more moderate Democrats have been against this idea. And the reason why they're against this idea is because they understand that protecting the rights and the power of the minority in Congress is important, right? The pendulum always swings the other way in politics, okay? And the filibuster is a good way of maintaining balance, right? A great way of maintaining balance, okay? And when you have balance, that's how you have stability. Stability is a good thing. Now, a lot of people will argue that, because we have so many checks and balances, that makes our government inefficient in terms of actually, passing legislation when we actually need it. And I think that's a legitimate argument. But I'm not necessarily sure if getting rid of the filibuster is the answer to that. I mean, maybe it is. I could be wrong about that. But in this case, this video is just about the sheer hypocrisy coming from Elizabeth Warren, who calls the filibuster racist, even though she filibustered Tim Scott's police reform bill last year. Okay. And Tim Scott, guys, I just want to mention this. I mean, this guy's on the banking committee. He's on the Senate Finance Committee. Tim Scott has been a part of a lot of key pieces of legislation from the Republican Party. I mean, this guy really is a legislative wizard, right? Like, you remember he worked with Trump on the HBCU thing. He worked with Trump on opportunity zones. I mean, that was basically Tim Scott's idea. Okay. Also, when it comes to the First Step Act, like, Tim Scott is really becoming a very key, important, and powerful piece in the Republican Party. Again, I just would not be surprised to see Tim Scott in 2024 be a very, very, very strong candidate, right? Especially if Trump doesn't run, right? I can definitely see Tim Scott being a dark horse come 2024, especially considering how things are going in the political environment. I'm just saying, I wouldn't be surprised to see Tim Scott really elevate himself over the next 3 to 4 years. So let's read a little bit more about this. Senator Elizabeth Warren may have just inadvertently cast herself as a racist. Yeah, probably. The progressive senator told Axios in an interview Thursday that the legislative filibuster, a rule that dates back to the 1800s and requires 60 votes for most legislation to pass in the Senate, is rooted in racism and should be removed because it effectively gives the minority party veto power. Quote, the filibuster has deep roots in racism, and it should not be permitted to serve that function, or it creates a veto for the minority. In a democracy, it's majority rules. She's 100% wrong about that whole quote. That whole quote is 100% wrong, okay? The filibuster is not rooted in racism. The filibuster came about in literally the early 1800s. It had nothing to do with race whatsoever, right? And some liberals might be like, well, it was used before the Civil War to block admission to the Union based off of slave status. Okay, and what does that have to do with all the other things that the filibuster has been used for? Okay, the filibuster has been used for a wide variety of legislation. It was rarely used until about the mid 1900s during the Civil Rights era, right? And when it was starting to be used in the Civil Rights era, what these Democrats always forget to mention is that it was used by them, the southern wing of their party, right, led by Strom Thurmond, was using the filibuster to block civil rights. Okay, he was using it to block the Civil Rights Acts. Okay, that's what it was doing. This was used by the Democrats. Right now, I get it. You know, people gonna have something to say about party switching and all that stuff. This is not a video for that. I'm just saying, if you're gonna tell the whole story about how your party used this. Okay, right? This has been a tool that has benefited the Democrats. One, right? And I don't necessarily think it's rooted in racism. It just happened to have been used to, you know, basically try to stop civil rights legislation, but that doesn't mean that its roots are in racism. The thing has been around since the early 1800s, and it just wasn't very much used, right? So, and also this idea that the majority rules, that's also not true, because if the majority ruled right on everything, why do we have the Electoral College? Why do we establish that in the first place, right? Why do we have the Senate set up so that minority states have a little bit more power? Because even though their populations are smaller, they still get 2 senators, which means they're overrepresented in the Senate, right? Which was by design. Now, again, I get that people say, well, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. It wasn't originally a part of Congress. I understand that, but it did come around in the early 1800s, and it's been here for a while, right? Now, I will say, I do agree with the moderate Democrats in the sense that it should be painful to use the filibuster. You shouldn't just be allowed to just be like, I filibuster and you block legislation, right? It should be more painful, right? You should actually have to sit up there and talk it out like they did back in the old days, where they literally would take turns talking a bill dead, right? I actually do believe that's a good thing, because it's not something that people should just be able to use just to obstruct, right? I mean, both parties have basically abused this power to obstruct with no consequences. I believe that it's more fair in the political game to make it hurt to use the filibuster. So I actually agree with the moderate Democrats on that. She argued amid renewed debate over the potential elimination of the parliamentary procedure. Warren noted that the filibuster was not included in the founders' original framework, but was a later creation that was designed to give the South the ability to veto any effective civil rights legislation or anti-lynching legislation. Leaving any subsequent parliamentary debate aside, the more relevant subject is that Warren herself, despite decrying the rule, has utilized it within the last year while in the minority party and against a black senator, no less. Last June, Democratic lawmakers in the Senate voted to block police reform legislation put forward by Republican Senator Tim Scott in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. The legislation failed to surpass the 60 vote threshold assigned by the filibuster. Only 3 Democrats in chamber voted to advance the bill, and Warren was not one of them. After the bill was stymied, Scott called out his Democrat colleagues for their shameful decision to play partisan political games with such an important issue. Quote, unfortunately, Democrats really want to hold on to this issue, Scott said. Quote, they believe they're going to win in November, so they'd rather write their own reform bill without any input from the Republican Party. You're exactly right, Tim Scott. You're exactly right. Quote, was it racist then? Asked CNN Scott Jennings about the revelation that Warren used the filibuster in June 2020. Fox News contributor and former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer said, quote, given how often Warren filibustered when she was in the minority, does this make her a racist? Anyone who covers this without mentioning her record is not telling the full story. Warren announced her support for ending the Senate filibuster in 2019, and now she's calling it racist in 2021. That places her use of the filibuster to block Scott's bill smack dab in the middle of her outspoken opposition to it. She probably would rather people just overlook her blatant hypocrisy, but it's hard to ignore. Yep, I 100% agree with that. I 100% agree with that, right? Because by Elizabeth Warren's definition, she is a racist. right? She's a racist because the filibuster is racist, and she's using the filibuster, which has racist roots, according to her. Not only that, she did it to filibuster to block a black man's police reform bill. Okay, like the amount of hypocrisy in this story and these actions from the Democrats, it's just mind-blowing, man. Like you just can't make this stuff up. And guys, Tim Scott's police reform bill really focuses on data collection. It focuses on trying to allow the federal government to collect more data and to give better guidelines for handling these issues. And this is very important, guys, because if you guys ever read any of these studies regarding police brutality, right? Some of the studies do suggest that there's a disparity in terms of how many black people get pulled over versus white people, arrests, crimes, things like that. However, the data is shoddy. The data is very, very shoddy, right? The collection methods are not great. Okay, so it's really hard to come to solid conclusions on exactly what the issue is or how to pinpoint solving a problem, because again, our way of collecting data, because it varies among police departments, sucks, right? So it's hard to really come to concrete conclusion. There's data that supports both sides of the argument, right? There's data that supports that there is significant disparity, right? And there's the data that supports there's not disparities. Okay, so Tim Scott is basically being like, hey, let's focus this bill around, collecting more data so that the government can provide better guidelines to these states and these local police departments, and we can get a more clear picture in terms of what's going on. There's also some other things in here too that addresses police brutality directly. However, Tim Scott has told a story of how, as a black man in Congress, he's faced some of the discrimination and some of the, I guess, racism that a lot of black people say that they face, right? He said he's lived the experiences of a lot of people that feel like they've been unjustly targeted by police. So it's not like the dude is not in tune with the problem. He's definitely in tune with the issue. I mean, again, he is a black male senator from the South. He's from South Carolina. Okay. So, and he's come out and said that, yeah, I've experienced this issue. This is obviously the issue I got. This is an issue that the Republican Party needs to get on board with. And he's worked to get his party on board with it. But instead of working with Republicans, instead of working with Tim Scott to come to an agreement on this issue when it was most needed, according to Democrats, okay, where you have people protesting in the streets, right, destroying their own cities. Obviously, this is an important issue to people. They did not want a Republican solution because it didn't go far enough, right? And now they want to complain because basically they're doing the same thing that they did to Tim Scott, right? If you felt like this issue was so important and something had to been done now, then you would have at least tried to work with Tim Scott and you would not have filibustered his bill. Maybe you guys would have came to an agreement, right? Even if it was under Republican plan, even if Republicans did get credit for it, who cares? Who cares, right? As long as you're doing the right thing. But see, again, like I try to tell you guys, these politicians don't care about doing the right thing. They care about themselves. They care about taking credit for it, right? Who took credit for it? Who did it, right? We don't like Tim Scott's bill because he's a Republican. And the filibuster is racist, even though we use the filibuster against Tim Scott. Now we want to get rid of the filibuster because we want to have our own bill, right? It's pretty, again, just blatant hypocrisy here. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.